I was going to give a talk, and we were talking last night, and we felt that there were interesting similarities and contrasts between communicating science, particularly on television in the UK and the US. And so we thought it might be more valuable to have a discussion around what science communication is, what are the, I suppose, the compromises and decisions you make, particularly when you're putting science on television, but also in the broader context. I think, as Brian Greene said earlier, the idea that there's I think, a strong polemical element that obviously can be put into science communication, in particular science television programs. I think that's very valuable. We talked about that. There's a different atmosphere, I think, in the United States and the UK regarding that kind of the polemic, the idea that the ideas of science can be applied much more broadly in the way that we deal with each other in political questions.
Yeah, I'd like to think that what science communication might be going forward, it would include more of a direct statement of relevance to how we live our lives, to the role that science plays in politics and the survival of our species. If you look back at the traditional science programming that you might get, you would see a documentary on television, and it would communicate some very important, interesting science, but then that would just be that. It would be like a Wiki page made visible in a video medium, and when you're done, it's as though you learned a little bit more science, but you didn't learn why it mattered. And so I think we both agree that in our lives, one of the most important statements about the relationship of science to our lives, to our culture, to our civilization, was made by Carl Sagan in his 1980 landmark series, Cosmos. Not only did it connect you, the public, emotionally, intellectually, physically, to the moving frontier of science, but it also blended science in such a way you were no longer thinking, oh, I'm learning this science versus that. All science was seamless in the delivery. Yeah. And so I think maybe science education going forward should think less about what chapter of a book is communicated and more about why science matters and how it works and why it can affect the fate of civilization.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about, I was 12 when I first saw Cosmos, and the thing, particularly the very famous 13th episode, made a big impact on me, which was really a plea to use all we've learned about our place, our physical insignificance, but yet, because it's likely, in my view, at least, that civilizations are rare. You can make an argument, actually, that we may be the only civilization at the moment in the Milky Way galaxy. You can argue that. It's a possible point of view. So that connection was made so powerfully in the context of the nuclear arms race at the time, 1978, 1979, 1980. And that put me in mind of an essay which I think, The Value of Science. It's a famous essay by Richard Feynman, which was based on a talk that he gave, I think, back in the 1950s, the early 1950s. And you would expect him to say that the value of science is in the spin-offs, the technology, increased life expectancy, medical science, etc. And of course, he says that first. But then at the end of the essay, he says that is not the most valuable thing. If I could communicate one thing about the process of science, and Brian Greene actually emphasized this absolutely rightly, I fully agree with him. It's what Feynman called, he defined science as a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance, which I think is a wonderful definition. First, it's very humble. First of all, it's merely satisfactory, and it is the philosophy that you begin ignorant, and you build ideas, you test them against data. As Feynman very famously always said, if your ideas disagree with the experiment, they're wrong, and it doesn't matter who you are or what your name is, they're wrong, in that very famous speech he gave, you can always see on YouTube. But I think that idea that he goes on to develop, the gift of science primarily is the philosophy of ignorance. And he extends that to the idea of what a democracy is. He says that because nobody knows anything with 100% certainty, the only way you can run a society or a country is by a trial and error system. So you try something for 4 or 5 years, and if it doesn't work, you turf the guys out and try something else for 4 or 5 years. And in his own inimitable style, he talks about that. But he's surely right. And I think that is one of the key things that we can aim to deliver. In any science documentary, of course, it will be 90% about the science, be it cosmology or the origin of life or biology, whatever it is. But underpinning that, the idea of the celebration of uncertainty and making sure that, for me anyway, every time we speak of ideas, as Brian Greene absolutely beautifully did, we underline the fact that this is always preliminary and there are no great sages that stand and get it right. No Trumpian ideas are present in science. I think it's very, very important.
Consider that Brian also confessed that they granted his PhD even though it was wrong. Is that correct, Brian? He bet on the wrong horse. One of the 10 to the 500 horses running around.
There were no errors.
No.
Yeah, it was definitely wrong, which is all you can definitely be sure of. I wanted to ask you actually, Neil, because in the UK, that is on the BBC, even the mass market channel, BBC One, that's a very acceptable thing to do, to take a rather overtly polemical stand, and I tend to do that. Do you feel that it's the same in the US?
We're not ready for that yet.
Because I think yes.
We're just not, I don't think we're ready for it.
But you were, of course, because in the 70s, late 70s, 80s, Carl Sagan did that. It was Cosmos, the original.
Yeah, and it took 35 years to do Cosmos a second time. I think the current discourse doesn't seem to care what is objectively true or not. People will want something to be true because it feels good, whether or not it is true. And the only way I can parody that is to comment that just because perhaps you gained a kilo of weight last week doesn't mean you can protest the law of gravity because it did not serve your needs. Doesn't work that way. So I worry that so much of what I do is not advancing people's understanding of their relationship to how the universe works, but it's just sort of holding on. Do you remember in the old days, the old variety shows, there'd be somebody who'd be spinning discs on long sticks? Do you remember this? And they would just run around, and if they were successful, it meant no plates fell. That was success, but it was a constant effort, spinning plates. And so I don't know. I cannot speak with confidence. I can only say what level of energy I'm investing in this. And by the way, I think the press has to participate in a way that understands what we're saying. And I'll give an example. Often when there's a new discovery, especially in physics, the first line of the newspaper article will say, oh, scientists have to go back to the drawing board because their cherished theories are now challenged. As though we're sitting in our office with our legs up, not thinking, just basking in our mastery of the universe. No.
You do a bit of that, though, don't you?
No.
I've got that image in my mind now of you there, the Hayden Planetarium.
No, and I've said this before, that there are, if you are an active research scientist, you are always at the drawing board, at the chalkboard. And you revel in a new idea that will challenge your idea, because that means things are ready to move forward. That's the most exciting time. Not some time we worry about. We might use the word worry, I worry, but at the end of the day, behind closed doors, it's the most exciting thing that can happen. And with the Higgs boson, the great search for that, and ultimately discovered by the Large Hadron Collider, it would have been almost as interesting if they had searched that same parameter space and didn't find the Higgs boson. Then it's like, oh my gosh, all of this that requires that it be there has to be reassessed. Yes, people would go back to it, but they would do it gleefully.
Well, I mean, I should say, it did nothing to do with science communication at all, but this is why there's tremendous excitement now at the LHC. As many people will know, because those results were published, there are hints of interesting particles, a particular one, what we call around 750 GeV, 750 times the mass of the proton, which is a signal which is not statistically significant enough, as we saw in the new supernova results, actually, the dark energy results. Not significant enough yet. We need more data. That's why the LHC is running now to take it. But those signals have caused already just preliminary results that may go away with more data. I think over 200 theoretical papers at the last, which tells you that nobody has a clue what it is, because the theorists are wheeling away.
Yeah, the more published papers, the less you know about it. Yes.
But I mean, it is fascinating.
No, sure. I got to drive that home. If you go to the bookstore and look for books on gravity, there's maybe 4 or 5 on the shelf. Look for books on stars, there's maybe 6. You look for books on consciousness, there's shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf. That means we know nothing about it, okay? Because once you know, it's done, no more books are necessary, and you move on to the next problem. Don't be confused by the volume of what is written.
What is fascinating about those, in those theoretical papers, you see what are the signals. So basically, if it's there, and I emphasize, although I'm on
it's a new
Atlas,
particle you're talking about.
Yeah, if it's there, and I don't know because we're analyzing the data, so I don't have any secret knowledge, I'm hiding away. But if it's there,
tell me now.
One of the, really, but if it's there, then it's, so what it is, it would be a heavy particle, a new heavy particle, 750 times the mass of the proton, so you know, what is that, 5 times the mass of the Higgs or something like that, decaying into 2 photons, 2 particles of light. That's what it would be if the signal stands up. And that is what, there are many, it could be one of the particles for dark matter, which we heard about earlier, could be one of those. Could be, though, if you go more speculative and exciting, it's one of the signatures for extra dimensions in the universe, so-called Kaluza-Klein graviton signals. There are ideas around that. So it could be that at LHC we're on the verge of making a breakthrough into some of the things you heard at the start of this session, possibly. But that's the key. To emphasize what you said, the point of the Large Hadron Collider, it was built because we knew we could confirm or deny the Higgs model. But it was also built because it's operating in an energy regime in which we've never operated before. So it is certainly not ruled out that there is new physics in that energy regime, and it's just possible that we may be seeing hints of that, which is very exciting.
The corresponding frontiers that we experience in my field derive from either opening up vistas in new bandwidths that we have never looked in before.
Well, gravity waves.
Yeah, gravity waves, certainly one of them. Consider was not until 100 years ago, 150 years ago, where we had telescopes looking anywhere other than just this narrow portion of the spectrum we call visible light. And we were trying to deduce the nature of the universe using only that band, that part of the spectrum, without knowing what black holes would tell us, what the early universe would tell us. So we were basically searching blind, thinking we weren't. And that's an interesting steps we took coming out of that era to then discover how to make detectors in microwaves and longer wavelength radio waves and X-rays, gamma rays. All of these bands of the spectrum now, I hesitate to say complete, but they give us a very broad view of what the universe is trying to say to us. But I'll say also in my field, if we build the biggest telescope ever, we will have detection capabilities where you point it anywhere in the universe, you're going to come up with something interesting and new and different that could challenge us all. Now, I want to get back to the across the pond difference in what you're experiencing in the UK versus the United States. I've seen in the United States a groundswell of interest and caring about the role of science in our lives and the prevalence of science in pop culture and in our media. It's there. It's there. The #1 show in American television, perhaps many places around the world, is a sitcom that basically celebrates the geekiverse in the name of the show called The Big Bang Theory. In fact, apologies to Big Bang folks in the audience, if you Google Big Bang Theory, the first hit is the TV show. The second hit is the origin of the universe. So you gotta smile at that at some level, okay? So, but in tandem with that is a rising community of people. I don't know if they feel disenfranchised from this moving frontier of science. Maybe they didn't do well in science. They have a bad experience, so they want to reject it and want to create a world that ignores it, and they think that that's possible. I don't think the solution here is just telling them they're all just go take science again. I think we need some sensitivity to who they are because they're out there and they vote and they yes, they vote. And so I would welcome some conversation, maybe even offline, what pathways into the rest of who's out there, because they want to live long lives and they care at some level.
Well, I mean, it's one of the conversations that I have often, because we have the BBC in the UK, which is a public service broadcaster in the purest sense of the word, the first one ever, of course. Its mission is to engage people and bring people in to a diversity of programming. I think it's very important. What worries me in the US a little bit is when you have multiple channels, you have the science channel, you have this channel, that channel, and those channels are specialist channels. I think you're in great danger of ghettoizing the audience, and then what you end up is preaching to the converted rather than drawing new people in and introducing them to ideas. And
one of the great values of the second round Cosmos that we did was that it was not relegated to the science ghettos of the higher channels that you've never heard of. So in the first run in the United States, it appeared on Fox, the network, a place where many demographic communities plug into of all ranges in the political spectrum.
Both Carl Sagan and Andrienne had said that to me, that was the original Cosmos, as you well know, because you were around at the time, when that was the absolutely, the central idea was it was bringing astronomy to people who would have never looked at the stars before.
And to do it on network television, did it. And then it went around the world on the National Geographic channels. And I was told in some countries that I got dubbed in a local language.
Did you?
Yeah, they dubbed me.
I should say, just before we finish, I've only got 2 minutes left.
Did they happen here? Did they? In Spain? I don't know.
I just wanted to say one thing, because we were talking earlier last night, actually, about I've done a new series, and it was this challenge of how do you bring people in, how do you the BBC have a phrase which is quite useful in science communication, which is give people permission to watch. So how is the initial door opened? And one of the programs we've just finished is called The Universe in a Snowflake. And it's just interesting, particularly an audience like you, I think it's quite geeky where that came from. It came from a book that Kepler wrote. Now, Kepler, of course, everyone knows Kepler for the laws of planetary motion, I think 1609, 1611. In 1610, he wrote a book called On the Six-Cornered Snowflake, which is a masterpiece of science communication. And also, for me, the best evidence I've ever seen that Kepler was one of the greatest scientists. We all know he was a genius, but the level of his genius had not been open to me until I read this book, so I strongly recommend it. And what happened to him, he was walking across a bridge in Prague to a New Year's Eve party, I think to his benefactor and patron, and he hadn't brought a present, and he was kind of upset about it, or not, a bit worried probably, because it was his benefactor. And he saw a snowflake landed on his arm, and he said to his benefactor, I brought you the gift of almost nothing. But in the gift of almost nothing, I bring you everything. And he went on to ask questions about the symmetry of snowflakes. This is 1610. So he says this thing is a six-fold symmetry, and the other one, all of them have a six-fold symmetry, the hexagons. Why is that? Why are they all different but the same? Is it indicative of some kind of deeper symmetry? Is it indicative of the underlying structure that builds the snowflake, which is something to do with water? Of course, he knew nothing about molecules. But to me, it's a 21st century mind that you see. This is the way a modern theoretical physicist thinks. And I think if I could have one recommendation as a piece of brilliance in science communication, but also just the insight into the mind of Kepler, On the Six-Cornered Snowflake is the most wonderful book. And that formed the basis of one of the programs, because we thought, well, snowflakes are a rather whimsical thing. They're something that they're not scary. You have permission to watch a program about snowflakes drifting down. But actually, you can see all the ideas. Kepler said at the end, I've read the whole universe into a snowflake. I've gone too far. I leave it to future generations to explore. It's the most beautiful work.
I think the value there is that he's connecting deep scientific thoughts to something highly accessible, such as a snowflake. Faraday did that as well. One of his great essays was recitation on a candle.
Yeah.
And
Sort of the Christmas lecture.
yeah, Christmas lectures. And the recitation on a candle, very familiar source of light in the day. And so you had an access point to it. Dare I say that one of my most popular tweets was similar, but I did not reference a candle or a snowflake. I referenced Beyoncé. But Beyoncé as something that's popular, that people have access to. She performed during the American Super Bowl, and in that game, the lights accidentally went out in the stadium. And I'm tweeting physics facts about football and momentum and collisions.
The underlying structure of Beyoncé.
No. And it was, I thought, what can I say about this? And I commented that the average human radiates about 100 watts as a light bulb, but after Beyoncé had danced the halftime show, Beyoncé probably radiates 500 watts, but we'd have to run a special experiment just for her. Well, this connected, like, physics with a major pop star who everybody else cares about for other reasons, and now you add to that, I found that this little bit of physics got picked up into the jet stream, and that for me was the way in this long tradition of if you take some physics connected to what people otherwise care about, then maybe they become a little more enchanted by what role physics, science in general, can play in their lives.
Absolutely. I think we've run out of time. Jim's standing up. So I've said thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.